Hey, I am Sarah Mills-Knapp. I'm the Director of Sustainability at the Greater Portland Council of Governments, and I'm here with a few of my colleagues and our presenters today. We're really excited to bring this webinar to you today, which is going to be a series, we're hoping. So we're calling this session one, but it is sort of comes on a couple years ago, we also hosted a grid webinar along with Gabe as well and some of our other partners in the region. That was more sort of a grid 101, and we've been wanting to do something to build off of that recently. So we're trying to, pull something back together to really start a series of educational engagement opportunities. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Great. So just a quick thing on our agenda, we're going to be just talking about our objectives today a little bit, and then we'll have the Acadia Center here to talk about engagement with system operators and the regional grid. And then we have Paulina from the PUC, Maine's PUC, to talk about municipal interactions with the PUC, and Joe is here from the Acadia Center. So we're really excited to have some great expertise on the panel today, and we will have hopefully plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. Go ahead to the next slide. So just for all of you that don't know, what is GPCOG, or the Greater Portland Council of Governments? We are a regional agency. We're sustained by 25 dues paying cities and towns in Cumberland County. And we also work with on regional transportation issues with Saco and Old Orchard Beach and Biddeford and York County. So for more than half a century, we've helped cities and towns do together what they cannot do alone. And we're really guided by the region's municipal leaders, and we work to make our member communities prosperous and economically sustainable. We provide planning services and implementation support across economic development, sustainability, land use, transportation, and broadband. Given these areas that we cover, we really feel like the issue that underpins all of these areas of development is energy, and more specifically, our electricity grid. Go ahead to the next slide. So we've been thinking a lot about, what is our role in helping to support our municipalities? And I think there's a couple, major issues that we're seeing with the grid. And this is not just in our region and not just in Maine, but really across the country. Um, there's a huge impact to everybody on the increasing demand. So on Tuesday, when it was so hot, I just saw that we reached almost the highest peak of demand on the regional grid. I think we were just shy of the record peak that was hit in August 2006. So there's obviously major increasing demand as people are electrifying, getting heat pumps, and also as the climate changes. And then obviously decarbonization and maintaining and expanding the infrastructure of the grid in order to decarbonize it is essential to our sustainable future. And then certainly for Maine, we're really looking at major impacts from extreme weather and trying to understand how we can make our grid more resilient to extreme weather. So given these issues, it's sort of more important than ever, we think, that municipalities understand their role in the decision-making process, and how they have a stake in helping shape the future of the grid and determining how we can respond to these challenges. So we're hoping that this series of webinars can help provide information to our members and our municipalities really across the state. I mean, it doesn't just have to be our region, you can go ahead to the next slide. We're partnering with the Southern and Midcoast Maine Resource Hub, which is really a regional collaborative of planning organizations who are working with the states to support municipalities. So we really wanted this to, we're happy to have it open to everybody. Gabe, I don't know if you want to say anything about SMRCC real quick, but.
Yeah, no, just other, we have got some other colleagues here on the line, but we're sort of coming out of the initial pilot from the Community Resilience Partnership. We were formerly R1CC, which was the Region 1 Coordinator Collaborative, serving as regional coordinators for the Community Resilience Partnership from York, Cumberland, Sagadahoc, Lincoln, and Knox counties. We've added some Southern Waldo counties, and we also have some Southern Oxford counties as part of that. So we're four regional planning organizations working together to support communities, mostly focusing on the Community Resilience Partnership.
Great, thanks, Gabe. So we can dive into the content. And, we're trying to sort of frame, I think today, thinking a little bit about what is the municipal role in our regional grid, which Joe can talk a little bit more about, and then what is the municipal role in our state grid issues, and Paulina will dive into those. So I will hand it over to Joe.
Well, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you being here for this timely and important topic regarding the future of our electric grid and what's at stake for communities. This webinar is a presentation of Acadia Center's Communities and Clean Grid program, which is grounded on the belief that municipal leaders, on behalf of the residents they serve, play a vital role in shaping the future energy and how their communities are powered. As our regional energy system evolves to meet both growing electricity demand and the shift to clean sources of power, the need for new and upgraded transmission infrastructure, those large power lines that move energy from where it's generated to where it's needed, will increase. How, where, and when we build those power lines and related infrastructure has significant implications for cities and towns. It will affect everything from local development to energy affordability to reliability during extreme weather. Yet municipal voices are rarely at the tables where these decisions are made. Today's presentation and Acadia Center's Communities and Clean Grid program, more broadly, is designed to provide information to cities and towns to help them understand and meaningfully participate in decision-making around how the future grid is planned, developed, and managed. It's our hope that communities won't just be impacted by changes to the power grid, but will actively help to guide them. Before we get underway, I would like to tell you a little bit about Acadia Center. Acadia Center is a climate and clean energy nonprofit headquartered in Maine and working across the Northeast US and Canada. We're engaged in research, advocacy, and initiatives to implement effective clean energy solutions for a livable climate and a stronger, more equitable economy. I'm a senior advocate at Acadia Center. Before that, I worked at the City of Boston under 4 mayors and served as the city's energy finance manager. It was while I was working on energy efficiency and clean energy projects for the city that I became interested in regional grid issues. It had become clear to me that every goal the city was seeking to accomplish, to reduce the amount of energy it used, to reduce the amounts it spent on energy, and to reduce the emissions associated with its energy use, all depended on the design and operation of the region's electric grid. Well, that has always been true. What makes municipalities' reliance on the grid even more urgent today is that the grid is in the midst of a transformation. That's not hyperbole. To put the scale of the transformation in perspective, consider that the regional grid it took a century to build will double in size in just the next 25 years. This doubling of the regional grid will bring with it associated economic, land use, and environmental impacts on local communities. It's not a matter of if the transmission of the grid will happen, but how it will happen, and whether the region's cities and towns will have a seat at the tables where decisions about the course of the transformation will be made. Those decisions will be made, after all, whether or not cities and towns participate as stakeholders in the development of grid policy. New England communities have a choice: to be the passive recipients of grid policy developed for them, or to be active participants in developing grid policies that they inform to ensure those policies are aligned with their individual and collective interests. It's time to ask a fundamental question about the grid. Who's responsible for it? The answer to that question is a straightforward one. We are responsible for it. That is, we as individuals, members of communities, and participants in the regional economy, we are the beneficiaries of the services the grid provides. And that puts us in a position to influence the development of grid policy and planning and how efficiently the future grid will be built. This leads to another obvious question. How exactly do we exercise our influence? That raises practical considerations concerning time and resources. But before offering some strategies to overcome the obstacles that scarce time and resources present, I want to acquaint you with the two entities responsible for grid policy and planning, the two entities responsible for building New England's future grid. They are the New England Power Pool, called NEPOOL and ISO New England, the region's grid operator. Participating in the development of grid policy and planning means engaging with both of them, because together NEPOOL and ISO New England will determine the scope and the cost of building the future grid and the pace at which it is built. NEPOOL is ISO New England's principal stakeholder group. It is divided into 6 subgroups called sectors, comprising power plant owners, transmission owners, companies that purchase and resell electricity, municipally owned utilities, renewable energy and energy service companies, and last, but certainly not least, end users. That is, electricity customers, including individuals, cities and towns, and commercial customers, from the smallest storefront to the largest manufacturer. NEPOOL's members inform grid policy and planning and recommend those policies and plans to ISO New England. With very few exceptions, ISO New England accepts NEPOOL's recommendations, often after recommending modifications of its own. ISO New England, in turn, is responsible for power system planning, wholesale energy market design, and the reliable day-to-day operation of the grid. It forecasts the region's future demand for electricity and plans additions to the grid to accommodate that future demand. When it comes to building the future grid, ISO New England is the entity that is responsible, in effect, for rebuilding the airplane while it's still in flight. To put the relationship of NEPOOL and ISO New England simply, NEPOOL is where grid policy is made, and ISO New England is where grid policy is implemented. Acadia Center is a voting member of NEPOOL's end user sector and participates together with NEPOOL's other member stakeholders in the development of grid policy. Is it necessary to influence regional grid policy directly by becoming a member of NEPOOL's end user sector? No. Indirect participation, especially coordinated indirect participation, can be every bit as effective as direct participation. I'll come back to that when I tell you about the Communities and Clean Grid program. But first, I want to provide you with an historical example of how municipalities informed grid planning when a developer proposed routing a transmission project through their communities. The example is from outside New England, but it nevertheless highlights how communities here in New England have the potential to engage in the grid planning process and influence outcomes. Our case study is the North Plains Transmission Project. The North Plains Connector is a 420-mile-long interregional transmission line connecting no less than 3 different transmission planning systems. The project has been praised, among other things, for its community-led granting structures. The project involved hundreds of stakeholders, including affected landowners, 25 tribal nations, and county governments. NPC LLC, the developer of the project, participated in recurring public meetings to educate community members about the project. 3 benefits resulted from the opportunities for stakeholder engagement created by host communities and the developer. First, it wasn't necessary to resort to eminent domain to site the line, and stakeholder requests to move portions of the line were honored, even though those route changes added 50 miles to the line's length. Second, the developer negotiated $4 million in grants for the North Dakota and Montana communities impacted by the line. Finally, the line created 800 jobs and yielded economic benefits. I want to invite you to consider next the kinds of results municipalities can hope to achieve if they engage in the grid planning process. First, though, we need to consider what it encompasses. The North Plains Connector case study is just one component of grid planning, project development. But successful stakeholder engagement in project development can't be duplicated here in New England unless project developers are required to engage with the municipalities that will host proposed projects. Currently, the regional grid operator, ISO New England, is soliciting proposals for projects that do not require project developers to specify how and to what extent they intend to engage with host communities. The lack of such a requirement is a matter of ISO New England policy, and that is the distinction I want to draw, the distinction between grid planning and grid policy. There can be no meaningful opportunity for municipal engagement in grid planning unless municipalities also engage in the development of grid policy. Let me delve into this example a little more. New England will soon have two alternative transmission planning pathways, the longer-term transmission planning pathway and the Order 1920 transmission planning pathway. The longer-term transmission planning pathway was developed by NEPOOL and ISO New England with the participation of New England states, and it is currently being implemented by ISO New England. The Order 1920 planning pathway is required by order of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and NEPOOL and ISO New England are currently considering how they will comply with the order. ISO New England recently asked for and received an extension on the deadline by which it has to inform the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission how it will comply with the order. ISO New England justified its request for the Order 1920 extension by stating that its ongoing implementation of its own longer-term transmission planning would help it to determine how it would comply with Order 1920. Among other things, Order 1920 requires ISOs like ISO New England to conduct mandatory stakeholder meetings. Municipalities may participate in those meetings as stakeholders. Because ISO New England stated that it would rely on its own implementation of the longer-term transmission planning pathway to comply with Order 1920, it was assumed the longer-term transmission planning pathway would also require opportunities allowing municipalities engagement as part of the planning process. But it does not. ISO New England just released its first request for proposals under the longer-term transmission planning pathway for a project planned to upgrade the transmission system between northern Maine and southern New England. The RFP does not require project developers to submit community engagement plans as part of their project proposals, but merely states that it will award points to those developers who do. This means that a developer that has not submitted a community engagement plan, or a developer that has submitted a perfunctory community engagement plan, may be selected to build the project. Advocates argued that all developers should be required to submit municipal engagement plans and that the RFP should contain specific evaluation criteria to compare the adequacy or superiority of those engagement plans. But ISO New England turned aside those requests. If municipalities have engaged together with other stakeholders in the development of the RFP, they very likely could have persuaded ISO New England of the need to require robust municipal stakeholder engagement as part of the longer-term transmission planning process. The failure of the ISO to require municipal stakeholder engagement as part of its longer-term transmission planning pathway is a stark example of why it is so vitally necessary for communities to actively engage in the making of grid policy. I'd like to tell you now about the Communities and Clean Grid program. First, the purpose of the Communities and Clean Grid program. The purpose is to serve as a resource to communities as the design and construction of the future grid unfolds, and to ensure that the unique stakeholder interests of municipal governments are represented in ISO New England and NEPOOL proceedings. There is a need for a community-focused program because NEPOOL and ISO New England grid policy will determine the future cost of electricity, the siting of transmission lines and other energy infrastructure, determine the fulfillment of municipal climate, environmental justice, and economic development goals, and directly impact communities that are selected to host transmission projects. And that brings us to the goal of the Communities and Clean Grid program: to foster the alignment of NEPOOL and ISO New England policy with the specific needs of local communities, and to make certain the specific needs of the region, cities, and towns are met as work on the remaking of the electric grid proceeds. Carolyn Dykema, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, and I invite you to engage with us in the Communities and Clean Grid program via GPCOG. We hope you found this information helpful. I hope you did. And Acadia Center will continue to make new information available through the program on our website and through our website, acadiacenter.org. Carolyn's email address and my email address are on this final slide, and we encourage you to reach out at the website, at the Acadia Center website too. You'll see that there are opportunities to subscribe to our newsletter if you wish to engage more. And with that, I'll hand it back to.
Thanks, Joe. I can take it. Yeah, and we're really we're very excited that Acadia Center has this program, and I think it'll be really beneficial to help support learning and understanding what processes are. And so, yeah, you can also reach out to me at GPCOG or Gretchen anytime, and happy to discuss. And I think in the future, we'll do a deeper dive into this program and the ways in which municipalities can participate through us with Acadia Center. So moving on, Paulina, would you like to take over?
Okay, great. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, I just want to apologize. They're doing work outside my office in the parking lot. So if that's disruptive, I apologize. And I seem to be having a problem with my screen. So sorry, I'm not directly facing you.
That's okay. We can see you and hear you so far.
Okay. All right. So I'm Paulina Collins. I'm an attorney with the Maine Public Utilities Commission. I've been here about a little over 17 years, and I work on integrated grid planning and climate and resilience dockets, among other things at the commission. And I have background in public policy and legislative work. I worked on Capitol Hill for a long time for Senator Bull Colvin, and then did legislative and policy work in the private sector and for the Maine Commission at the Maine Legislature. And so I'm excited to be here today to talk to you a little bit about some of the grid planning and resilience work that's happening at the commission. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the commission's purpose, sort of what the commission is, how we operate, talk about our integrated grid planning docket, what our statutory charge is, a little bit about the docket and our process, a little bit about, what the goal of integrated grid planning is, and then sort of where we are in the process, next steps, and ways municipalities could engage. And then I'm also going to just touch on a couple other things that are happening at the commission that might be of interest. Two other commission dockets. One is a climate change protection plan docket, and the other is a docket related to more shorter term resiliency efforts and escalating storm costs. And then we also have a review underway on grid enhancing technologies, and I'm just going to touch base on that briefly, and then talk a little bit about how you could learn more and get involved at proceedings at the PUC. So the commission's purpose is outlined in statute, and it is to ensure safe, adequate, and reliable utility service at rates that are just and reasonable to customers and utilities, while also helping to achieve reductions in state greenhouse gas reduction emissions and minimizing energy costs. So a little bit about the operation of the commission and how it works. We are a quasi-judicial independent agency. We adjudicate utility cases. So that can be a big rate case, and it's similar to litigation in a court. So it typically involves, pre-filed written testimony, written discovery, technical conferences where parties can ask questions of witnesses, hearings, legal briefs, a recommended decision by staff, opportunity for parties to comment, and then finally a commission decision based on the record. We also do inquiries and investigations. So inquiries are less formal than adjudicatory proceedings, and we typically do them to gather information. And some of the dockets I'm going to talk about today are inquiries. Investigations typically involve an issue that involves one or more utilities and is also adjudicatory. Then we also do rulemakings. When the legislature passes legislation, we're often doing rulemakings to work out the details and implement the statute. And then we enforce, our rules and laws in our jurisdiction. The commission, to provide sort of a transparent and accessible process, all our hearings, technical conferences, and deliberations are streamlined live on the commission's website. The public may also attend meetings of the commission in person, And all our major cases are accessible from the commission's homepage. And they're all posted, so you can go back and watch a proceeding that you might be interested in after the fact. And that's all available, like I said, on the commission's website. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our integrated grid planning docket. So legislation was enacted in 2022 that requires the commission, beginning in October 1st of 2022, and then every 5 years thereafter, to initiate a proceeding to identify the priorities to be addressed in filings by the investor-owned T&D electric utilities regarding a grid plan that will assist with the cost-effective transition to a clean, affordable, and reliable electric grid. The statute defines grid plan as a 10-year integrated grid plan designed to improve system reliability and resiliency and enable the cost-effective achievement of the state's greenhouse gas reduction obligations and climate policies. The statute specifies that the commission hold technical conferences or stakeholder workshops to identify priorities and assumptions, goals, methods, and tools that could assist the utilities in developing the grid plans. And then that the commission would issue an order directing the utilities to submit those plans within 18 months of the order. The statute further requires that the commission make the grid plans available for public comment for no less than 60 days. The commission may also order utilities to revise the grid plans to address deficiencies. And then the commission may use the grid plans and input received from interested parties in rate cases or other proceedings involving the utilities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our stakeholder engagement process, because this was, the first integrated grid planning proceeding at the commission and in Maine. So we opened an inquiry docket that I described earlier to get information from people. We opened that first to seek input on the process and various issues related to opening that docket. We conducted outreach efforts to try to identify potentially interested stakeholders that don't necessarily always participate at the commission. That included reaching out to municipalities. We also reached out to environmental justice and equity groups, tribal representatives, the Chamber of Commerce. We had discussions with ISO New England, the U.S. Department of Energy, and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab about work done on integrated grid planning in other states. Then we opened the integrated grid planning proceeding. And I've put the docket numbers of the cases I'm going to talk about in so that people can go and find more information about these cases on the commission's website if they'd like. So the commission hired a consultant and we conducted a transparent, collaborative, and robust process accessible to all stakeholders. We held 13 meetings and workshops with stakeholders and solicited input on the priorities and a variety of other topics through written comments. Then in July of last year, the commission issued its first integrated grid planning order. The priorities that were developed with stakeholder input through that process were reliability and resilience improvements, improving data quality, and promoting flexible management of consumers' resources and energy consumption. The order also identified potential steps to achieve those priorities and other information that at a minimum has to be included in the grid plans. So this includes the utility's vision over the next 10 years of how the utility's proposed investments and operations will achieve those priorities, the forecast to be used in developing those plans, a scorecard for evaluating proposed investments and technologies. Next slide. Thank you. Detailed information regarding the utility's progress related to technology and system investments. Then proposals to measure or evaluate and track environmental equity and environmental justice impacts of the grid plans, both in the near and longer term, as well as proposals to measure the effectiveness of those plans in making progress toward the priorities, towards improving reliability and resilience, and enabling the cost-effective achievement of the state's climate and greenhouse gas reduction policies. Keeping costs affordable and facilitating facilitating the achievement of the state's climate action and greenhouse gas emissions reduction policies are overarching principles that apply to all priorities. The Commission, in its order, also established requirements for a utility-led stakeholder process during the 18-month period that utilities are developing the plans. And this was so that stakeholders could provide input at certain milestones in the process where stakeholder engagement could influence the filed grid plans. The utilities must also document all stakeholder input received during the utility-led stakeholder process in the grid plans, and whether the feedback was incorporated, and if it wasn't, why it wasn't. So I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about some of the goals of integrated grid planning. Throughout our proceedings, stakeholders commented on various potential benefits, including, enabling a more accessible and transparent planning process, engaging in holistic long-term planning, prioritizing and targeting investments. And that's sort of key, given the affordability issues and the cost of these types of investments. Providing information to the Commission and stakeholders to better understand the utilities' both near and long-term distribution system plans and both the costs and the value to ratepayers from proposed investments. And ensuring that utilities are investing in the grid Maine will need for the future while keeping rates affordable. So in terms of where we are and next steps, as I mentioned, the utilities are now developing the grid plans and they are engaging with stakeholders. Utilities, both CMP and Versant, have web pages dedicated to integrated grid planning, which contain information on upcoming stakeholder meetings, how stakeholders can get involved, how they can provide feedback. So I've put the links to those pages in the presentation. Now, the Commission is not participating in that process, and that's because the Commission has to review the ultimate grid plans that are filed. We have to review the public comments that are filed. The Commission has to order potentially any changes to the plans to correct any deficiencies. And in addition, investments that come out of this process will be coming to the Commission for approval in adjudicatory proceedings. And so it's important that the Commission maintain some, appropriate distance in that planning process and impartiality, as those will be coming to us in future cases. So the first grid plans are due January 12th, 2026. So that's just a little over 6 months away. And as I mentioned, there will be a public comment period of no less than 60 days. So municipalities could review the grid plans and offer comments as part of that docket. And then under the statutory scheme, November 1st, 2027 is the date that the Commission will open its next proceeding. And the Commission, as it outlined in its order, will be building on the priorities and the content requirements that we established in this docket and lessons learned in developing these initial grid plans. So I just want to touch on a couple other things that are happening at the Commission. So we also have a climate change protection plan docket. This also stemmed from legislation enacted at the legislature. These are also 10-year plans, and these are filed by both the investor-owned and the consumer-owned utilities. The plans must include specific actions to address the expected effects of climate change on utility assets. And the statute provides that the Commission shall provide a process to allow for input from interested parties on the plans, and that the Commission may use the plans and input received during, on the plans in rate cases or other proceedings involving those utilities. So the first climate change protection plans were filed December 31st, 2023, and the Commission sought public comment on those plans. And we also engaged Berkeley Lab to provide assistance and resources, especially to assist our consumer-owned utilities who have less resources than the investor-owned utilities. We had 2 of the labs who presented on work done in other states, potential best practices, and resources for utilities. The Governor's Energy Office also presented on potential funding opportunities. And legislation that was enacted just this past legislative session aligns the schedules for these plans, which had been every 3 years, to every 5 years, to be consistent and align better with the integrated grid planning process, as we just start those proceedings once every 5 years. Pushing this out a little bit will also provide some relief to the COUs as they start to work on sort of the next plans. And also, utilities are working on vulnerability assessments and mitigation plans as part of these first plans. And the commission is working with the lab and the COUs right now on resources to help them for doing the next plans, which will be due May 1st of 2027. So another docket that I just wanted to mention is the resiliency storm cost inquiry. So the commission initiated that in response to increased storm activity and outages and escalating storm restoration costs. And so while the investor-owned utilities are working on doing the integrated grid plans, and a number of the utilities are doing the vulnerability assessments and the mitigation plans related to the climate change protection plans, the commission wanted to open a separate docket to try to explore, what can we be doing now in the shorter term to try to help improve resiliency, and how do we address increasing storm costs? And the commission sought assistance from the U.S. Department of Energy's Grid Deployment Office and Berkeley Lab. The commission sought comment from stakeholders on a list of comments as a starting point. And then we held 2 workshops. We held a workshop last October that included multiple presentations from investor-owned utilities, the lab, and the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. Then we had a panel discussion with the presenters, stakeholders, and the utilities. And so as part of this docket, we've been looking at, what are the most cost-effective ways to harden the grid while balancing affordability? We have been looking at, are there new technologies that can help prevent outages? Are we doing targeted undergrounding, or should we be doing more targeted undergrounding, given increasing storms? Looking more at the utilities vegetation management programs, are there additional changes needed there? And then looking at innovative approaches in other states. So the second workshop that was held in April also looked at, should we be looking at different cost recovery mechanisms and incentives for utilities for resiliency investments? And in terms of innovative approaches that other states might be doing, we've been exploring regulatory sandboxes, which provide a structured environment for testing new technologies and business approaches under modified or more flexible regulatory rules to increase the speed of adoption. And the Connecticut PUC first talked about what they're doing in that area at the first workshop. And we had Berkeley Lab come back and talk to us about more efforts in other states on that. So the commission is determining next steps in that docket. And then one final related thing, this also stems from additional legislation enacted by the legislature. The commission is directed to conduct a review of available grid enhancing technology to reduce or defer the need for investment in grid infrastructure of the state. This only applies to the investor-owned utilities. We hired a consultant, and the consultant has been working on a report for us, and that is nearing completion. And that is another tool that the commission can use in rate cases or other proceedings, including the integrated grid planning dockets. So to conclude, on the last slide, on to the next slide. I just wanted to point you to our more information on the commission's website there's information about how to participate in commission proceedings. There's information about intervener and participant funding that may help qualifying, entities participate in PUC proceedings that they might otherwise not be able to, because this can help cover costs of expert witnesses and attorney's fees, other reasonable expenses. Then there are links to recent orders and cases of notes on the website. And then you can also access the commission's case management system, where all publicly available documents in all commission cases are available. And there's information there too on how to use CMS, and people at the commission are always able to help people if they're having trouble. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Paulina. So let's see, Gretchen, if you want to pull down the slides, we can jump into some Q&A. So we have a couple questions in the chat, which we can start with. We also have a few questions. The first question is directed at CMP, which is, can CMP identify low-hanging fruit for beneficial electrification for the near term? We had invited somebody from CMP to be here today, and they are not here, unfortunately. They were not meant to be presenting, but we knew that there may be some directed questions for CMP. But I think what we're hoping is that either our next series or our next webinar could specifically have CMP, recognizing that they are the utility for this particular region, but not for all regions. So I don't know if Joe or Paulina, you have particularly, I mean, that question is not specifically for you, but if you have ideas about beneficial electrification in the near term, or some examples from other states that are working well.
Yeah, what I can say certainly is and I can't really speak to how beneficial electrification will be accommodated by the utilities in Maine. But I can say that this is a challenge that affects every utility across the region. And I mentioned in my presentation that the grid is undergoing a transformation. The reason why it's undergoing that transformation is largely because of beneficial electrification. Beneficial electrification is the electrification of heating and transportation. So in the past, many of us heated our homes with liquid fuels. Maine in particular has been extremely successful in rolling out heat pumps as an alternative to oil and propane and other fuels for heating. And so this increases the amount of electricity demand within each state and certainly across the region. And recently, ISO New England completed a study, its 2050 transmission study, in which they really attempted to forecast how much and how rapidly demand would increase between today and 2050. And their estimate was that today's record peak, and I think you mentioned this earlier, Sarah, this is about 28 gigawatts.
Right, yeah.
ISO New England is estimating in 2050 that peak will reach between 51 and 57 gigawatts. So that the peak will essentially double in the next 25 years. And that's largely due to beneficial electrification.
And actually, William, I don't know if you're on if you can take yourself off mute, but you said you had some examples as well.
Yeah,
and I
sure.
think, yeah,
And I'll be quick. Thank you, Sarah, for setting this up. I work mostly with the Portland Climate Action Team, and our goal is to reduce greenhouse gases across Portland. Recently, there's been a big push to grid electrification. We have hundreds of thousands of tourists coming in every year, hundreds of large cruise ships. CMP did a study last year that said, best case scenario, it would take 10 years for them to update the grid, and then we'd have to spend $60 million for those cruise ships to hook up to the grid when they come and dock for 8 to 10 hours a day. What PCAT is proposing is that rather than spending that time and money, let's identify low-hanging fruit now where the grid is capable to have major opportunities to offset that greenhouse gases. So rather than waiting 10 years and spending $60 million, let's do something now. And I think it would be very beneficial if CMP or Verizon, can identify where the opportunities are for municipalities to give some incentives in order to start that process now to offset those greenhouse gases. There's not a lot, but we know cruise ships spend a lot of money. So rather than waiting for 10 years and $60 million, let's do something now. So I think this is something that probably all municipalities could benefit from, is where there is that additional capacity now, let's put it to work.
Mm-hmm. Great,
Thank you.
thank you, William. Yeah, I think it's an important issue that would be interesting to explore in a future webinar. I think we have seen examples in other states that there are ways to sort of reduce peak demand and ensure that there is sort of a smoothing out so that the grid could handle more electrification. Things like large cruise ships coming in, I know, is an issue. And we also in the future, CMP is proposing a grid upgrade in our region, $500 million, I think, that they're working on. So we are going to have CMP come and present about that and the ways in which that will help support beneficial electrification in the region, and the impacts from that. Paulina, I don't know if you have any information about.
I don't really have anything to add. I mean, I would echo some of what Joe said. It's a pivotal time right now for our distribution grid. It's going to require substantial investment to continue to serve customers safely and reliably, particularly in light of our, beneficial electrification goals. So, it's a challenging time, but it's an exciting time too. And we're exploring some of those things too about programs and technologies that can move off peak demand or lower peak demand. So that's part of the integrated grid planning process as well.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Go ahead, it might be worth pointing out, using William's example. The goal would be for Portland to be able to serve ships when they come to port with electricity, rather than having them moored and needing to continue to power themselves with diesel.
Yeah.
Right? And so what you're really talking about is adding a large load in downtown Portland. It's like, it could be large loads could be factories, right? But you're talking about adding a large load there that would intermittently serve these ships. So that poses a problem for the distribution grid, the local grid. And as William pointed out, there have been estimates of the cost of completing this project on the part of the utility. And so there are obviously modifications that would have to be made to the local grid in order to accommodate that large new load. That will happen on the distribution grid. But these additions of load, and this is another example of beneficial electrification, ripple up to the transmission system, to the regional transmission system. And I just wanted to draw that distinction between the two, between the regional transmission system and local distribution systems, and say, we need, the distribution system is there to serve customers, right? And the manner in which they're served has local impacts and simultaneously has regional impacts as well.
Great, thank you, Jim. So just hopping to the next question, Karina asked what the docket number for the resilience storm cost inquiry, and if the workshops are recorded and if there's a way to watch them. I was also curious, Paulina, who attended the workshops, what type of stakeholders you had attending.
Sure. So yes, the docket numbers are in my presentation.
Oh, great. Okay.
But I can give you that right now too. The resiliency storm cost docket is 2024-00191.
Great.
And that, we've had, utilities, both the consumer owned and the investor owned, the governor's energy office, people like the trust, the public advocate, just a variety of stakeholders are involved. And yes, they are reported and available. That, as I've mentioned earlier, you can go to the commission's website and you can scroll down and you can watch one of those presentations. And actually, like I said, we've been getting a lot of presentations from Berkeley Lab because the commission wanted to sort of work and build on work done in other states. And I think that's been helpful too. And I know that our consumer-owned utilities have found it very helpful, some of the information that Berkeley Lab has shared. So I would encourage people to go and watch some of those when they can, if they'd like to, because that may be helpful in some of the things that you're doing in your communities.
Great. Okay, looks like the next question related. Oh, somebody tried to sign up to stay involved, stay informed on CMP's grid planning, and it's not working. So that's good to flag. Another good reason to get CMP here in the next webinar. So yeah, go ahead, Pauline.
I was just going to add too that those links that I provided to CMP and Versant, so they have information on what they're doing on related to the grid plans that they're working on developing, and upcoming stakeholder meetings or community meetings. They were going to do both virtual, I think, and in person. They're providing, there may be materials there that people could go look at too, to kind of get an update on kind of where they are in that process. But those pages also include information that those utilities are doing on their climate change protection plans as well.
Oh, great. Perfect. So hopping to Bill's comment in the chat, which I think everybody can see, but asking, will distribution be addressed in this series, and the reliability of distribution and the ways in which municipalities maybe be interested in efforts to build more reliability into the distribution system. So this is something actually Karina in Southern Maine is working on initiative right now to look at how municipalities, what is the role that they have in building resilience into their local grid. And that includes, a lot of tree trimming. And we are going to have her come present as well to regarding the findings of their work in Southern Maine and York County. So we will be addressing that, but I don't know, Joe, if you have comment about sort of the local grid and the importance of resilience there.
Yeah, reliability is a value that's, of concern at every level of the entire system. Regionally, we want to make sure that ISO New England is always able to balance the regional demand with the supply of electricity, because if they go in imbalance, that opens the potential for regional outage. But I do know in Maine, I hear there's a tree or two in Maine. Local outages are much more prevalent. They occur with regularity, and I believe that, as you pointed out, the primary strategy is to make certain that that the trees aren't in conflict with the transmission lines, that they're not coming into contact with them, and so I think that those strategies need to be reviewed with each of the utilities to make sure that they're being done in a comprehensive way, and of course an affordable manner as well, and that they're done in anticipation done in anticipation of weather events rather than reactively. There'll always be a tree limb. As much planning as there will always be a tree limb that comes down somewhere on a wire, but the obvious goal is to minimize that from happening so that only a few dozen customers are affected rather than several thousand customers.
Yeah, and in our grid webinar that we did, which we can share the recording from the previous one, CMP talked a lot about their resilience efforts and on the local distribution grid and how that is addressed from CMP's standpoint. But yeah, that is something we'll be talking about in the series.
I was just going to mention too that one of the workshops we did, I believe it was in the storm cost and resiliency docket, CMP also presented on more recent changes it's made to its vegetation management program, sort of going to the ground to sky program, and potential benefits, increased benefits for ratepayers and less outages. So that may be another thing of interest to people to watch in the workshop that the commission held.
Oh, great. And we can share that as well.
Yeah.
So let's like, yeah.
I will also add too, and this is a subject that Pauline and I brought up too, grid enhancing technologies. They're an interesting suite of technologies that can be deployed both on the transmission system and on the distribution system.
Mhm.
To the extent that they're deployed on the distribution system, they can be used to help utilities identify precisely where an incident has occurred so that they can deploy their crews in order to repair those lines when necessary, much more quickly and rapidly. And so
Yeah,
I
great point.
think in addition to vegetation management, there might be some thought given about, to what sort of technologies can be used to, to enhance the visibility that the utility has across its own distribution system.
Yeah, great point. So the next question, I think, Pauline, is for you. How involved is the PUC with demand management systems such as MTEP, which I don't know what MTEP is. Maybe somebody does.
I'm not sure what
Okay. Douglas, are you able to unmute if you want to share more about your question?
Based off of my research, it's the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, so MISO, the Transmission Expansion Plan.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not
So
sure if that
does the
helps.
PUC get involved with demand management systems more broadly, though?
Well, I'm not exactly totally sure about the question, but I mean, I think, Efficiency Maine Trust does a lot of, the energy efficiency, energy conservation programs. So I'm not sure I'm not
So
sure
the
I can be too helpful on that question.
Oh, Alan, it looks like you have
Hi. Yeah, I was hoping that Doug would be able to speak, but I can do that in his stead. MTEP, we have a lot of acronyms in the state. This one particularly stands for Maine Transactive Energy Pilot. And this is a program that the Post Road Foundation is piloting here in the state of Maine. And we had a briefing in Brooklyn. The Brooklyn Climate Response Committee, along with the Climate to Thrive, did a workshop about a month ago. Basically, this is an effort to encourage homeowners to install on their appliances, whether it's a heat pump or a hot water heater or something else that uses a lot of electricity, to install on there a device that allows two-way communication back to the energy supplier so that a homeowner can decide to have the temperature, the thermostat go down. And this is a way of reducing demand on the electrical grid. Participants in this program are given a cash incentive to sign up. And then depending on the amount of flexibility they wish to have, how much they wish the appliance to reduce demand, they get a graduated rebate for that as well. So I can dig up and put in the chat a link to that. And that's a briefing on that. And I don't know to what extent the PSC is involved in that. I don't believe that came up in our webinar, but happy for Pauline to weigh in if she knows more or anybody else.
Yeah, I'm happy to look into it more when you provide the information in the chat. Yeah, who did you say was doing the pilot?
It's the Post Road Foundation. They're out of California. Seth Hodel is the person who presented, and they're working beyond Brooklyn. Obviously, they're working elsewhere in Maine. And let me put a chat in there. Joe, I don't know if you've heard of this or not.
I haven't heard of MTEP in particular, but I can tell you that the utilities here in Massachusetts have a program, an energy efficiency program called Mass Save. And through that energy efficiency program, they are encouraging their mass utility customers to enroll thermostats, EV chargers, and residential scale batteries into a program that they call Consolidated Solutions. And I can tell you that last summer there was a day like this past week when the system peaked. And together the utilities here in Mass, by controlling all of those devices that were enrolled in that program, were able to control, I think, between 300 and 400 megawatts of consumer demand. It was not an immaterial amount of reduction. But I'd be happy to. I put my email in the chat. You'll also find it on the Acadia Center website, acadiacenter.org. If you want to speak more about it, Alan, I'd be happy to do that.
Sure.
Great. And this is really helpful for flagging topics for future webinars as well. I do think demand management is largely, managed between Efficiency Maine and the utilities and the Governor's Energy Office. So we certainly could have a webinar focused on that as well for those interested.
Good.
So next question actually is highlighting a program we also are somewhat interested in, the ETIP, the Energy Transition Innovation Partnership Project, which has a funding opportunity open right now. I can drop the link in the chat through NREL, and there's been a few awards in Maine in MDI, DRL, Brooklyn, Eastport, it sounds like, and the awards provide technical assistance for these communities to work directly on strategic energy plans or energy transition issues that they are working on. Yeah, and James highlighted here, distributed generation, battery energy storage, microgrids, and those kind of issues. I know a lot of these communities are just starting to sort of peel back all of the, the layers of the onion, but and it will be costly, especially for a lot of the rural and harder to reach communities. So we can share more information about that in the chat as well. Okay. Oh, perfect. Callie dropped it in. So I don't know if there are other questions. We have a few questions, Gretchen or Callie. I don't know if one of you want to pose them to the panel now.
Yeah, I can take it. So we kind of touched on a couple of them, so I'll just pull out a couple that we have predetermined. So we talked a lot about process and structure. So with NEPOOL, ISO New England, the planning docket, it's all very helpful information. But what are some, other than that, specific ways communities can make their voices heard effectively within or outside of those systems?
Yeah, I can begin. I would say that as I mentioned, during my presentation, one thing that confronts us all, whether or not you're an elected or an appointed official in a city or a town, or you're a simple, a customer, an individual customer, we really just don't have the time and resources to follow what is happening at ISO New England and NEPOOL, and more locally what's happening in the dockets at the PUC. And so what Acadia Center is trying to do with Communities in Clean Grid program is to provide content to those associations like GPCOG, whom you already rely on as places to get information. I like the way that the description of GPCOG was put at the very top of the presentation, which is we allow you to do together what you can't do alone. And so we are going to be working with GPCOG to keep them informed so that if there is an issue that they believe it merits your attention, and that there's an opportunity for municipalities to engage and influence an outcome, they'll provide that outreach. And we'll be sharing content with them that they can in turn share with you. You can also subscribe, as I mentioned, subscribe to our newsletter. And I want to tell you, I want to encourage you to subscribe to those newsletters, because I can tell you that they're written for the layman. They're not written for technocrats. So they're plain English and very brief descriptions of essentially what's happening. Because, the real problem is there enough time during the day to follow what's happening? No. And even if there were enough time to follow what was happening, how do you determine what issues are important, which issues aren't? And even if there were enough time to follow what was happening and enough time to get up to speed to figure out what's important and what's not, uh, the final obstacle is we all feel like we lack agency, right? If we act as individuals or as individual cities and towns, are we really going to have an impact? And that again, it, brings us back to trying to work with entities that will allow all of us to engage collectively on all of these issues.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. Before Paulina, you jump in, yes, with GP communities, but this is in collaboration with SMRCC. So I would say, while we would definitely be collaborating, we also would encourage collaboration amongst planning organizations and the economies of scale that you talked about so greatly. So thank you. Paulina, do you have anything to add?
I was just going to say, like I mentioned, now might be an opportunity for municipalities to, engage in the stakeholder process that the utilities are running, because there is a real opportunity to participate at that juncture that can help inform or influence the first grid plans that will be filed in Maine. And like I said, there's a lot of, there is information on the utility websites. I would also say, you could file, because we certainly understand it's hard. Everybody has their day job, and it's hard to keep track of various things. But I would say that the initial notice that goes out in a PUC docket, so like on the storm cost resiliency docket, sort of gives some background and why the commission's opening that docket, what it's hoping to achieve. So that's a good place for people to go to kind of get some information about what that's really about and how they might be able to contribute. And I would say, we're all seeing increasing storms. We see it all the time. This past week, I went out to my car the other night after work, and my car said it was 100 degrees. And the trees that are coming down, they're coming down with more frequency. And so I think, it's helpful to the commission to hear from communities about what's happening, what the impacts of these extreme weather events are in your communities as we do these public policy dockets and work on the future electric grid for Maine. So I would say that, and again, you can file comments in a PUC proceeding anytime, at any time in the docket, and that there's a specific public comment category when you file comments through CMS. And the only other thing I was going to ask is, do you work like with sort of Maine Municipal Association, for example, to maybe that might be another way, if you're not doing it already, to solicit stakeholder input amongst your communities and then file something from MMA collectively. That might help you as well to be engaged in the process, but not have it be too time intensive.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And then we've got like less than 5 minutes, so I'm gonna sneak one more question in. But what is, other than planning and resilience, which again we've covered in great detail, so I thank you all. What is the number one thing you want municipalities to pay attention to in regards to grid planning?
I can take that one too, to start. In terms of the grid, and I'm using that term to include both the regional grid and the distribution grids. It's important to think about what we rely on them for, and we rely on them for reliability, and we rely on them to sustain the local and regional economy. There are, in my work on communities and clean grid, of course, I had to look this up. There are 1,519 cities and towns in New England, right? And those cities and towns are home to 15 million people, and they sustain a regional economy that produces $1.5 trillion in goods and services each year. And so engagement on grid issues from top to bottom, from the local utility on up to ISO New England NEPOOL, is really about making certain that that system remains reliable, or is made reliable, and that it continues to provide the services that we all need including sustaining economic development now and into the future. And engagement is required in order to make certain that that happens. Because unless there is engagement, there is the risk that the maintenance and the expansion of both distribution systems and transmission systems will become more expensive than they need to be and will be ultimately less efficient than they need to be as well. And so it really is vitally important to find a manageable channel in which to remain engaged and to participate as a stakeholder.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. And Paulina?
Yeah, and I would just say, I would, I would focus on the grid plans. That's a big effort right now. I would, keep an eye on what's happening, maybe try to find a way to participate in what's happening now with CMP, for example. And take a look at the grid plans when they're filed, maybe file comments in the docket. And also I would say, keep an eye on the storm cost resiliency docket, because that too is trying to look at something more nearer term. And we are all seeing increasing storms, and with that, increasing storm restoration costs. And we're trying to figure out how to manage that. So I think those are the two things I'd say, to keep an eye on and see if you could find a way to participate in.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll leave it to you, Sarah, to wrap us up.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I think those are great points for future topics, and I think we're going to try and host something maybe in August or end of August, beginning September. Kind of a weird time, but I feel like, everybody can tune in if they want to from their vacations. I do think to me, it feels like CMP's integrated grid planning would be a great topic for the next webinar, so we'll try and dive in there. But thank you all for coming, and Joe and Paulina, this is really helpful for setting the stage for future conversations. And for everybody who participated, we're always looking for feedback and comments, and if you have other issues you'd love to hear about, feel free to send us a note. We'll be sending out a summary document with all the links that were discussed today, all the slides, as well as the recording. So you'll have that. And again, yeah, please feel free to just send us a note if you have other questions or topics you'd like to see us talk about. And thank you all for coming.